1. About a year ago, I was working part-time as a server, and needed to look for some extra work as the busy season had slowed down, and I needed to make more consistent money. I wasn't looking incredibly seriously, as me and my girlfriend lived in a condo owned by her parents, and I had virtually no bills. One night, me and my girlfriend go to get dinner from a relatively well-known pizza chain near us. Inside, they had help wanted flyers practically spilling onto the floor. As I had multiple years of food service under my belt, I figured it wouldn't be an awful choice for some extra part-time hours. I mentioned to the manager that I was interested and would drop off an application the next day, as I was dressed to go pick up pizza. Which means a dirty t-shirt with my dog's hair on it, sweatpants and flip-flops. Obviously not interview attire. We take our pizza and leave, and the manager actually follows me into the parking lot, practically begging me to just do the interview with him then. I thought it was weird, but didn't think anything else of it. Ended up getting hired. Now to give some backstory, when I say I have food service experience, I mean I have years of management experience all the way up to assistant store manager for multiple fast food restaurants. The reason I didn't apply for a higher level job was, as I said, money wasn't really a huge issue for me, and at the time I was just coasting and saving money to move out of state. After starting, it became very clear that my boss, who we will call Howard, had absolutely zero idea of what he was doing. It started off with the restaurant having zero daily, weekly, or monthly cleaning duties, which if you worked fast food you know is an absolute necessity. He would consistently not have the answers to questions I had and direct me to other employees. Simple questions like which side of the oven does a specific pizza go on, and would smoke a cigarette every 20 minutes. The fact that the store had been open less than a year and was already in disarray speaks to how things were being run. I would come to find out he was a janitor or custodial engineer, as he liked to say, previously, and had zero food service experience, and somehow got hired to be the general manager. I saw this as an opportunity for me to get paid a little bit more for doing the same work I would inevitably end up doing. I offered to be his assistant manager, as he had no one in his store who wanted to do it, and he had already asked me previously, on the condition that it stay part-time because I really liked my serving job and didn't want to give it up. I told him that I would spend the time teaching him behind-the-scenes stuff that fast food training doesn't put in manuals or online tests. How to effectively make schedules, how to make weekly cleaning charts, weekly build-to-orders for shipments, things like that. Then, when busy season at the other job started, he could hire a full-time assistant. He delightfully agreed. Me and Howard were the only two managers at that store, with 2 drivers and 5 employees other than that. He would schedule me to open-to-close shifts in a row on his 2 days off so he could keep them every week, and would justify it by saying he worked open-to-closes on the days I wasn't there, since the manager has to be there to handle any of the cash from the safe. He never worked a single double shift. I worked this for a couple of weeks, and within that time literally every single employee except for me, Howard and the driver, we will call Jeff, had quit, and we hired new people. Me and Jeff got along swimmingly, as we were both stoners into the same music and fairly laid back. We also loved to talk shit about Howard. He was also Howard's next-door neighbor and sold him some weed on occasion, so he had all the dirt all the time. It became clear to me that there was some money issue going on somewhere, as we were getting way more tips at the front counter from credit cards, on reports, than going into the big tip bag for employees. This wasn't the easiest catch, since he would save the tips up for 2 weeks to distribute them to employees, on the week's opposite of payday. However, with the store being an unorganized mess, it was hard to know if it was money being stolen, or just simply numbers being put into the system incorrectly. One particular night I was closing the store and was having some issues balancing the drawers, and the numbers weren't adding up. I called Howard, who picked up with a hiccup and a slew of slurred words. I explained to him the problem I was having, and he tried to walk me through it, but was either too drunk or more likely just didn't know the answer to my question. I told him I would call his boss, who I had met a couple times and had mentioned if I ever had questions to call him. Howard immediately freaked out and said, "Don't do that. They don't want anyone to know how to work the numbers on the point of sale. Otherwise they will try and steal money." Knowing that was an asinine response, I said that makes zero sense. How am I supposed to fix a problem if I don't know how it works? Then he said the words that started the snowball that would come crashing down in his whole life. Told me, Listen, you're asking way too many questions about the cash. It makes you look really suspicious. Like you're the one stealing money. I told him whatever, I would leave everything the way it was, and he could fix it the next morning. Or try at least. I had to be careful, because in food service, if stealing money ever comes into question, most places will just fire you since they can hire any zit-covered kid to replace you. Because of this, and just my morals really, being called a thief is the one thing I do not stand for. I hatched a plan with Jeff, who sided completely with me and had his suspicions for a while about him. Jeff knew that he was an alcoholic who would never turn down a night at a karaoke bar. Now Howard was interesting because of how incompetent he was. He still tried to be the biggest people-pleaser I've ever met, but in like a lonely and desperate way. He had practically begged me multiple times for us to go drinking together or come smoke with me at my house. Keep in mind I am 24 and he was 32 with a wife and 2 kids at home. We decided to both invite him out to a night of karaoke. The night before, he had a big meeting with his boss and the VP of training for the whole company. Of course, since me and Jeff both invited him, he couldn't say no. I actually ended up having a good time that night. Not because Howard was good company, because my plan involved me buying Howard at least 7 Jaeger bombs, a double shot of Patron, and a lot of beer I had to drink a fair share of. What a birder, I know. My girlfriend, who was designated driving for us, dropped him off at home around 5:30 in the morning, after a rather long smoke session at my house, suggested by me, of course. Needless to say, he did not show up to work the next day. He called and told his boss, who was already at the store, that his kid needed to go to the hospital the night before, and that he was still at the ER. They called me around 11 to come in and cover his shift. When I got there, I asked Howard's boss why he called out, and when he told me the reason, I said, "Really? Well, I stopped by that karaoke bar last night for a few hours and he was there. I wonder why he took him in and not his wife," and showed him a picture of an obviously fucked up Howard and myself. They ended up firing Howard within 30 minutes and had offered me his position, as I had more experience than him anyways, and was already practically running the store and had completely taken over training new employees. I should have been perfectly content with him getting fired. I never imagined to have been offered his job. I was blown away. However, I still didn't accept the job as I didn't want the stress level the job came with. They say the best gifts keep giving. Well, so do the best revenge plots. Howard had his wife kick him out, ask for a divorce, and full custody of his kids. He went over to Jeff's house and sobbed and cried, cursing me for ruining his life just so I could take his job from him. I would have given anything to have been a fly on the wall, to see the look on his face when Jeff told him that I didn't take it and quit the job shortly after. 2. Context. This happened a few years ago. I was 18 and working as a receptionist for a community nursing service. As the youngest in the team by a long shot, the average age of the employees being around 55 to 60, I was usually the one responsible for the computer stuff. Mostly just simple things, nothing a quick Google couldn't solve. The other staff members were wonderful, and I learned a lot from working with them, except for the assistant manager, Karen. This woman was the bane of my existence. She was 75 plus, recently came out of a 15-year retirement as a receptionist, and was armed with a certificate in business management from a 4-hour online course. She refused to use basic computer skills such as Word or email, stating that she didn't need to learn them again when she had others to do it for her, namely me. In a 5-hour shift, I would spend 3 hours just fielding her tasks. Needless to say, this came along with all the fun personality traits that make a manager from hell. Malicious compliance. At the start of my shift, I received an email from Karen, asking me to print the attached files. One was a PDF and the other an MP4, so assuming she just meant the PDF, I take the printed copy to her. This is roughly how the exchange went.
"Why do you only have one file? I sent 2.
"You want me to print an MP4?
"Isn't that what I asked? A monkey could do your job, and probably better at that."
Here I'm pretty sure she laughed at her own joke. I give her a desperate look. "I don't think you understand."
"Don't try and teach me. Don't forget I did your job for 20 years, and now I could have you fired."
Already over it, and ready for some malicious compliance. Okay, well, I've never printed this type of file before, so it might take a while.
"I don't care how long it takes. I'm your boss, and I've told you to do this. Once it's done, you can move on to other jobs."
I'm grinning ear to ear at this point. I get back to my desk and send her an email summarizing our conversation and explicitly clarifying that she wanted me to print an MP4, to which I got a snarky reply. Perfect. I spent the next 4 or 5 hours pausing the video every 2 to 3 frames, screenshotting it, pasting it to a Word document and printing. The administrative tasks piled up, not that Karen noticed because she mostly spent her time reading magazines and talking on the phone. I felt bad as this placed an extra load on the other receptionists. However, since Karen was universally hated, they gave me their blessings. Once complete, I took about 100 pages carefully held with clips to her desk and sweetly told her that I'd printed the other file. She looked smug until she saw what was in front of her. Page after page of almost the same picture as a man moves through the video, some slightly blurry, all in full color. She was furious, to say the least. But I was 1 hour overtime in my shift, and Karen knew that would already cause her some issues, so she let me leave, though I knew it wasn't over yet. As expected, I got called into HR for a meeting the following week, where they accused me of wasting company time and not complying with management. I explained the situation in detail and showed them the email, including her awful reply. I also showed them a few more emails and texts where Karen used some particularly descriptive words to insult our staff members, including the very HR rep taking my interview. Turns out this was the straw that broke the camel's back, as Karen had multiple reports against her from other staff members, and she had been driving HR insane with her own complaints. She lost her job the following week. The best part is that this happened on a Sunday, where I got double pay. I took some of that sweet overtime cash and brought in cupcakes to work once Karen was gone. I said it was an end-of-week treat, but we all knew we were celebrating. The HR rep seemed to particularly enjoy hers. 3. I've been with my current employer for many, many years now. Even though I've quit, I've come back to them. My company also has an incentive. If an employee comes up with a way to do business better or changes something that has a net benefit to the company, they get a percentage of the increased revenue and profit. Over the years with this company, I've had several major impacts. Well, about a year ago, I was talking to a senior-level manager, Bob, and Bob was telling me about how the company had been having an issue in recruitment and hiring of new talent for our sales division. Now, I had been in sales before and knew of the pitfalls our structure created and why senior reps would excel and junior reps would get crushed, and had a really good idea on our turnover challenges. Then one night I had an idea on how to change the sales structure of our company almost entirely, which would still retain our senior reps, but also make it easier for younger, more junior reps to find success and stability by a result reducing turnover. I spent a good amount of time on designing this plan before I ever presented it to anyone. Since this was Bob's area of expertise, after many revisions and bouncing it around my head, I called Bob and I presented my idea. Bob liked it a lot. However, he had a few minor tweaks, and he brought up concerns company executives would have. I tweaked the plan and came up with rebuttals to those objections and shared my plan with Bob. I did this several times. I would say, though, my plan was about 90% original. Bob had been with our company for decades at this point, and I've known him for my entire time, so I trusted Bob would be sure to credit me. Considering my name was all over my presentation I sent over to Bob, I expected Bob to share in the love with me should there be any. I felt like I needed Bob as an ally to make my idea work, which is why I brought him in my plan. I followed up with Bob and he basically made it seem like my idea was rejected, that the company was going to keep on doing what it's always done. Okay, fine, whatever, shit happens. It's not the first time my idea has been rejected. Cue a few months later, and our new fiscal year is starting, and our CEO calls everyone to a company-wide meeting. And as I sit down to watch, I witness our CEO praise Bob for coming up with a brilliant new sales structure, strategy, and compensation plan. It is my plan with my name removed. The CEO was gushing over how wonderful this idea is, and how he thinks it will benefit us greatly. I'm fucking fuming. Piss Bob stole my work. Put his name on it and took credit. He violated my trust and lied to me. He told me the company had rejected the idea. Yet here I am watching my company implement my idea. I get on the phone with my VP and let loose. Now my VP, Tim, is a really good guy and I trust him. Tim is taken aback, says that right around the time I presented my plan to Bob, Bob started presenting to senior management, and it was almost immediately considered a great idea. In fact, Bob knew the company was considering forcing him into retirement because they felt Bob was holding the company back, and the company needed to make a change, and this idea saved Bob's job. Now to give you an overview of how in-depth my plan was. Completely restructured compensation plan, completely changed how we present ourselves to new potential hires. Completely changed our sales training to be more focused on real-world realities. Refined the sales order process to reduce workload and streamline. Did all that using current infrastructure. Each step included suggestions on how to implement the change. Bob oversaw all of this in his current role. I then asked if I could prove that it was my idea, that I had presented it to Bob, and so forth. Now, Bob and I had discussed this over email and Facebook Messenger and another chat app. I went through our emails, Facebook Messenger, and the chat app, and took screenshots, created a PowerPoint, makes it so easy to present ideas, and sent it to my VP. 2 days later, my VP called and said I needed to go into a conference call with HR, my VP, and the CEO. In that meeting, we discussed the plan I had created, the collaboration I had done with Bob, and my plan to implement it. Not only that, I presented the research I had done, which Bob did not have access to, and justified why my idea was a good idea. The CEO seemed impressed with what I had done and convinced that I was the true creator. I was then asked what I thought had happened, and I straight up accused Bob of stealing my idea and removing my name from it in an attempt to further his career. I was told they would be having a separate meeting with Bob after that. They would inform me of any future changes. A week later, my VP called me and asked me if I was offered the chance to implement my plan, would I be willing to do that. This was obviously a promotion, and I said of course. 2 weeks later, I got a call from my VP telling me he's coming to my location to visit me. He also tells me I should make sure I look sharp and presentable. I tried to figure out why he was coming, but he wouldn't say. 2 days later, I come into the office, check my email. Now all big retirements and resignations are announced company-wide. I see an email stating that Bob has retired. What I found strange is the retirement date was effective immediately, and that his replacement will be announced shortly. Generally, there is a time period for a takeover to happen, and the replacement is announced in the email, along with a brief overview of their qualifications. The time for my VP to show up comes, and in walks my VP and the CEO. We go out to lunch, and the CEO says,
"PJ came to visit you because I always think it's best to give people major promotions the news in person. But I'd like to offer you the position of Director of Sales and Sales Recruitment, and put you in charge of implementing your idea,"
to which I accepted naturally. Then I asked, "Is this why Bob, retired?" To which the CEO smiled and said,
"After talking to you and talking to Bob and discussing it among senior management, it was decided that it was time for a change, time to inject new blood into our organization. And Bob really wanted to start his retirement, so it was best for everyone."
I smiled and said thank you. I know perfectly well Bob intended on working until the day he died. 4. Back in secondary school, I, then 18 female, went to her friend's 18th birthday party. The plan was to have cake and give presents at the birthday girl's home, then drive into the city center for a meal followed by drinks in a bar. Since I did not live close by, I would drive there and back home afterwards in my car either way, so I volunteered to be one of the drivers for the night. The other 2 people that would drive the party guests around were a family member of the birthday girl, as well as a guy called Peter. Peter was the boyfriend of Amy, a girl in the same friends group as me, and birthday girl. Our group had the rule that unless something was explicitly labeled as a girl's day, all invitations included our respective romantic partners as a +1. From what I could tell, Peter was not close to anyone in our group other than Amy. But they only ever showed up together. I'm not kidding. Amy once refused an invitation to my birthday party because Peter would be busy with his studies that night. I never got along great with Peter, but I always acted civil and polite around him. Birthday girl lived in a part of town I've never been to before. While driving from her place to the restaurants, we drove through a stretch of road that had several hard-to-see curves, with several intersections and traffic lights and several lines of road in each direction. The road is crowded with cars that drove at the speed limit. I did not try to drive too slow as not to block traffic, but I had to drive a little below speed limit. When we reached the restaurant, Peter pulls me aside.
"You do know you can cause accidents by driving too slow, don't you?"
I'm annoyed since I'm an experienced driver and he has no reason to lecture me. Yes, I know, but I never drove in that road before, so I could not go full speed while navigating safely in that traffic. Also, I'm not sure that driving between 40 and 45 kilometers an hour in a 50 kilometer an hour zone can actually be considered too slow. He sneers and leaves to join Amy at the tables. Later, we drove to a different part of town for drinks. Mine was the last car to enter the parking lot, so the other cars had already parked by the time I found an empty spot. Now, there is something you should know about my car. It was a solid working car, but a bit on the older side. It drove well, but was missing some amenities newer cars had. Most annoyingly, it did not have hydraulic power steering. As a result, it was very hard to adjust the wheels while the car was standing still. It was possible, but did require some elbow grease. I was used to it and could move the steering wheel while standing with little problem, but I had also adjusted the way I drove to make it possible to do most adjusting while the car is still moving. Among other things, I was very careful while parking, as correcting the car's position mid-parking required wheel adjustment while standing still. I was letting my car roll slowly into the right position to get into the parking spot in one move. Just before I got to the spot where I had to start turning the steering wheel to get the right angle without having to stop, Peter left the group waiting for us and walked over to my car. I lowered my window. Peter, in the most condescending tone I've ever heard,
"Well, how about I help you out and park the car for you, huh?"
I was just about to explain to him what I thought about condescending a-holes like him, when my eyes fell on his car, his brand new car his parents bought him when he got his license. His nice car with all the amenities you could imagine. Cue the malicious compliance. I let my car roll up further to the exact spot where the wheels had to be fully adjusted in order for the car to fit into the spot. I then shut off the motor, smiled and said, "You know what, that sounds like a wonderful idea," and exited my car. He took my keys, started the motor, grabbed the steering wheel and suddenly froze. His face turned to me with a scared look in his eyes.
"Does your car not have power steering?"
"Nope, now go on. Show me how to park my car." He had to adjust while standing several times until my car was finally in the spot. The friends in my car had a very hard time suppressing their laughter. He exited, handed me the keys, and did not even look at me for the rest of the night. I think I even saw him rubbing his upper arms in pain a couple of times. He never bothered me again. 5. This happened in the mid-80s while I was active duty Air Force. I was a sergeant, E4. My direct supervisor was a technical sergeant, E6. This T-sergeant, Rob, was a real jerk. He was about 5'10" and a beanpole. He lived on coffee and cigarettes, and thinking of ways to bully subordinates. While in addition to being a jerk, Rob had a very nasty sense of humor. He could dish it out, but couldn't take it. We had these old metal desks with plexiglass covering the tops. He started in on me with supergluing my coffee cup to the plexiglass top. Needless to say, when I went to pick up the cup, everything went everywhere. Of course, the whole office laughed hysterically. I didn't blame them. Nobody wanted to be Rob's target. Next, he moved my car to another parking lot. Right before I called the security police, he told me where my car was. He kept it up. Not just me either, but the whole office, till one day he went too far. We had just got a new captain assigned to our branch. He was a nice man, quiet, kind, and earned all of our respect. He heard about the crap Rob pulled and witnessed a few of the milder pranks. Then Rob got nastier. I went out to the parking lot at the end of the day, and my car, a little Civic, was up in blocks. I almost had a stroke. Rob went too far. Granted, the captain made Rob put my tires back on and read him the riot act. Back in the 80s, the atmosphere was much more relaxed, i.e. you could get away with more. The captain and I decided that I should get my revenge. My revenge had to be carefully thought out, and I had to cover my ass as Rob could destroy my career. First, the captain changed my reporting official, supervisor, to himself. This was to prevent Rob from writing me a horrible, or mediocre, Airman Performance Report, APR. The timing was important as Rob had just written my annual report, so the change in reporting official wouldn't trigger another APR. Then I went to the base hospital and got a few letterheads from a friend in the Environmental Health Office. The Environmental Health Office was the office that handled all the reports of STIs and did all the mandatory interviews. I had to swear in my unborn child's heads that this wouldn't get back to them. The captain and I went to work on a letter scheduling a date for Rob to be interviewed, as a confirmed contact of someone that was positive with an STI. This was going to hit Rob hard, you see. He thought the world of himself. According to him, he was his wife's master, and he ruled the house and his kids. He never had any other woman but his wife who, according to him, worshipped the ground he walked on. Also, she wouldn't leave the house to buy groceries without letting him know, asking permission. I sort of believed him on that last one as she called the office several times a day. Well, the letter was written and placed in the afternoon distribution. The captain made sure he was standing next to Rob when he opened his office mail. Rob was a creature of habit and always stood right by his distribution tray to read his mail, coffee in cup and cigarette in hand. I was sitting at my desk watching. I swear Rob turned white and I could hear him say something to the captain. I could see the captain reading the letter Rob handed to him, so I moved a bit closer, not a huge office, and heard the captain say, "Well, Rob, have you been horsing around?" Rob, of course, was denying this, like, really, who would touch him, yuck, and kept saying, "I can't believe this." It wasn't until a few minutes later when Rob went to grab a phone to call his wife, maybe, that the captain said, "Wait, Rob." He, the captain, looked at me and said, "Do you think this is enough?" The captain and I both busted out laughing. Everyone in the office was looking around confused and asking what was so funny. Neither the captain nor I would tell anyone what was going on. Rob knocked over the distribution boxes, threw his car key, and started having a fit. The captain stopped Rob's fit and basically told him quietly that he deserved what he got, and he ordered Rob to stop with the pranks. Thank God I thought about changing my reporting official, because Rob would have roasted me. Not much later, I volunteered for an overseas assignment. It seemed the prudent thing to do. My revenge did get around eventually within the upper ranks. It seemed to be a consensus that Rob got what he deserved. 6. This happened when I worked in retail around 2005. I was 15. I was working at a very small grocery store, and although it was a small store, we were always busy, and it was near a popular beach and along a highway rest area. The night before, I had worked from 12 a.m. to 6 a.m., packing shelves. There was a huge delivery coming in that had to be stocked for the next day. I was offered double-time pay for the shift, so I jumped at the chance to work it. At 12 p.m. that afternoon, 6 hours after finishing the packing shift and barely getting 5 hours of sleep, I got a call from the assistant manager, Fran, who wanted me to come in to work a late shift. I explained that I just finished a shift and only had a few hours sleep, but the other girl called in sick and you're the closest person. I lived in the motel next door. My family were managing the motel at this point. I was too naive to know that I legally didn't have to come in, and I should have been paid overtime for working back-to-back shifts. Fine, but I'm working on 5 hours sleep, so don't expect me to do much. I got dressed and walked like a zombie to the store. When I arrived, we were extremely quiet, with the occasional customer every 10 minutes or so. I was surprised she called me in at all, considering that even on a busy day, one person can run the store on their own. At around 2 p.m., Fran comes to me and says, "I'm going on my break. Will you clean the store while I'm gone?" I, picking up a duster, knelt down on my knees and proceeded to dust underneath the shelves. It had been thoroughly cleaned during the 6-hour packing shift I'd done a few hours ago, so it didn't need mopped. "No, not like that. You need to get under the shelf to clean it." "Why can't you do it? I'm exhausted, and I'm doing my best not to fall asleep on the spot." I'd informed her that I'd done the midnight packing shift. "You have to do it. I have a bad back." Fran then proceeded to grab the duster and lean down against OH&S bending guidelines and dusted underneath the shelf to demonstrate, making it look easier for someone who claimed to have a bad back. I'm going on my 15-minute break, and by the time I get back, I want the floor to be spotless. Don't do anything else. Absolutely. Spotless. Gotcha. It was 2:02 p.m. at this point, and I knew that any minute now there would be a tour bus arriving. It arrived around 2 p.m. every day. Cue the malicious compliance. I started cleaning under every shelf and every display like my life depended on it. And a few minutes after Fran had left, customers began to trickle in. But I was under strict instructions to only clean under the shelves. Customers began to queue at the register. This was before there were self-serve registers.
Hello, are you working? Can I get some service, please?
I'm so sorry, sir. I'm bringing out my innocent puppy dog eyes and red tear-dusted eyes from lack of sleep. I was told I had to clean the floors and I wasn't allowed to do anything else. I really don't want to lose my job. The customers stormed out of the store and a few minutes later came back with Fran in tow. She had been outside smoking. The customer addresses Fran.
This poor young lady is in tears because you threatened her job. Fran, you have to stop doing this to your staff. Frank, the manager who was in charge of Fran, will be hearing about this.
I told you I was working 5 hours sleep after working all night with Frank packing shelves. I'm going home to sleep. I believe you have some customers that need serving. I was so tired and angry that I didn't care if I was fired, so I went home and slept for most of the afternoon. It turned out that customer was one of Frank's close friends and was the driver of the tour bus that arrived every day. I turned up to work my regular shift the next day and explained to Frank everything that had happened and how Fran had treated me. He told me to go back to work and he would take care of it. Fran got a harsh talking to about her behavior and conduct in the workplace and was let go. This was her final warning, as she had been doing this for months to other staff members. Assistant managers don't have as much power as they think they do. Oh, and her bad back? She didn't have any back issues. She just used this as an excuse not to have to do anything at work. I never saw Fran in work uniform after that, but she did come in from time to time to buy groceries. We were the only grocery store in the area, apart from a takeaway shop. I'd always give the same "Hi, welcome, how are you today?" with the biggest grin on my face. Boy, that was sweet. 7. I had recently moved into a house with 2 other girls. It wasn't the best house, but seemed to look okay for a college apartment. One of the girls had a friend who had lived there before and told us that the landlord was sexist and kind of a dick, but usually meant well, and it was decent rent. I'll be referring to him as Dumbass Landlord. We were all broke, so we decided to sign a lease. I should have realized the warning signs when he wanted us to sign it in a big boys after he had just eaten dinner there, and the leasing agreement looking like he chopped it from other pictures of lease agreements on Google. We also found his apartment as an ad off of Craigslist. Things were fine for a few months. I was living alone until the next school year was start and wasn't home all the time, since I would go over to my boyfriend's a lot and sleep over. It was a split house with an apartment in the basement and ours on the first floor. It wasn't long until I started to notice things happening. We get a good amount of rain since we were in the Midwest, by some big local lakes, and it was springtime. We'd get a good amount of water, and the concrete steps to the house would consistently fill up with water I had to jump over, and it would disappear overnight. It also started to get a little bit of a musty smell in the house, and I started coughing and sneezing all the time, but didn't know why. Soon the other girls moved in and started having some difficulties with Dumbass Landlord. He wouldn't tell us when he'd come over to check on the property. He said he did this to keep up on looks and mow the lawn, but he did it way too often for any of us to be okay with. He would argue with us about having a copy of our own lease. He'd yell at us to give him rent payments in cash, especially before going up to his cabin north with his girlfriend. But the biggest of all was that we were having problems with mold, and he did not care. For a while, we hadn't talked to the people in the basement apartment, until everyone started having problems with him. We'd hear them arguing and yelling down below as often as we would upstairs. But they were in a hellhole. Everything they owned had mold growing on it. They had bugs everywhere, earwigs, beetles, ants, you name it. They were constantly throwing away their clothes, dishes, furniture, even their college papers and homework, since it was all growing mold. They spent money on plastic bins to hold most of their important items, but even those would get moldy. We also found out they were supposed to have another roommate down below, but she couldn't live there from her allergies to mold after signing a lease agreement. We also found out he verbally abused her and her mother on the phone to the point where they were crying, and she couldn't get out of the lease. She ended up paying for 2 places every month so that she didn't have to live there, because he wouldn't let her break the lease and didn't care. Upstairs wasn't as bad as the basement, but it wasn't good either. All of us were coughing more and more each month. We would wake up coughing in the middle of the night and were getting really sick. We tried to air out the house as best we could, but nothing helped. I ended up getting a severe case of strep throat so bad that every swallow I took made my eyes water, and made me verbally make noise from the pain. I tried to ask the doctor that I went to if he could prove that this was from mold later, but he unfortunately couldn't give me a solid statement on it. Me, being a vocal, neutral good person who was also going to school to be an architect, tried to explain to him what was going on in the house. No air circulation, his concrete steps and foundation walls were not sealed, so all of the water I'd have to jump over was most likely going into the basement walls, causing most of the mold. We also found a few areas of the roof that needed patching, since we noticed some leaks among other things. And the basement apartment had cheap patio doors for their only means of entrance and exit, which would consistently be up against water when it rained, adding to the problem. Oh, smart dumbass landlord decided that we were all just girls complaining about silly things that didn't mean anything. So he brushed us off, and said we were fine even though I had told him that I was learning about these things in school, and knew what I was talking about. He wouldn't let any of us out of the lease as hard as we tried. So all of us girls in both apartments decided we would get out if it was the last thing we did. Then began researching all of the legal apartment and tenant information for our state and city to get out. We were paying for attorney fees, started taking pictures of the mold upstairs and downstairs that we could find, talking with several different city staff and police, and started compiling this into a nice document. After deferring my rent payment to get a copy of the lease from him, we could finally take a look at our legal document and use that further to get out. We were also working with another landlord at a renting company in town, who I will call Good-Ass Landlord. He was thankfully doing his best to get us out of the hole and into his apartment. Through him we'd get all of the legal ins and outs of the renting business, and he would help us find a loophole. Then, after months and months of arguments, money, and researching, we found it. If we sent in a mold test to a research lab and it was over the limit of what was inhabitable, we could get out. It was safe to say we had a pretty good idea this was over the limit. The test came back a few days later, and we sent that off to the city, including our nice document of pictures, statements, and leasing agreements. Not even 4 hours went by and we got a call from the city. Our house was so full of mold that we were to move out of that apartment within 24 hours, and it was to be condemned. We were ecstatic. All of that hard work had finally paid off, although it was horrifying to know that the mold count was so high. The mold researcher who had been in the business for more than 30 years had not seen a place with a higher mold count than this house. Yes, this included black mold. Fast forward to us happily packing up our house, all of our parents getting us out together, us moving into the apartment that Good-Ass Landlord kept open for us to move into, and poor old DAL sobbing in our driveway as we happily stacked boxes into cars, complaining that he should have paid more attention and listened to us. This was his girlfriend's property and she's going to dump him. We all took a picture the next day, smiling in front of the condemned signs. It's still one of my favorite pictures to this day. Serves him right for not listening to his tenants. In the aftermath of it all, apparently this city knew about a lot of the shady things he did when we spoke to them. It seemed like he was an eye-roll landlord. They knew of other problems he had with tenants, but no one had been able to do anything about it until us. He'd sneak his way out of things, since it was a really small town. Unfortunately, there weren't a lot of rules in place for bad landlords unless they did something really illegal, which is why we had a really hard time getting out of there. Also, about a year or so later, I saw more college students living there again. We're pretty sure he did one of those at-home mold testing kits to get it up for sale again, or fought the city somehow. I don't know what he ended up renovating other than he ripped out a lot of carpet. I felt bad for those new people, just wished them the best and hoped they don't have as bad of an experience as we did. I wish it turned out different in the end, but I hope he learned his lesson to actually help his tenants when they need it. I don't hate the guy, but I think he has some things to work out for himself. You might also be wondering why we didn't sue. We could have, but it wasn't worth the money and time, since we were all graduating in a few months and broke from speaking with lawyers. We did see what we could do about it, though. We just decided that getting out of the house and cutting ties would be the best, instead of dragging the situation out further. 8. I worked at a small spa company. There was only about 6 workers there. I worked there for a year and a half and only met the owner once, but talked to them on the phone a lot. She was batshit crazy, but that's besides the point. Anyways, I got hired because my friend's mom, Pam, was the manager, and someone had quit in the middle of their shift, so they needed someone fast. I worked really well there and learned very fast. I was very good at the job to the point where after a couple of months, they sent new hires to be trained by me. Turnover there was bad. Despite this, I didn't get a raise or anything. It wasn't a big deal, but it would have been nice. Anyways, I was always a closer. There would be a list of things I had to do after we closed, like vacuum and dust and such, janitorial things. As months go by, Pam begins to pick apart things. A string was left on the rug, the candy bowls weren't filled, even though they weren't half gone, etc. Nothing too big. Slowly things started to get worse. Eventually I was being told that I was not cleaning rooms that I know for a fact I had. Now I admit that once in a while I would forget to clean something, but I was getting yelled at for things I knew for a fact I cleaned. My other problem was that my coworkers would forget the same exact things. She wouldn't yell at them, but would just say, "Try to remember," or something along those lines. Eventually Pam got other coworkers to lie so that she could report me to the owner. Many days I came from school and would be wearing my jeans. Pam left right when I got there, so after I clocked in and counted the drawer, I would go and change into my work pants. Well, it turns out other coworkers would lie and tell her I never changed. After this, I began taking pictures and time-stamping them. This worked for a little while, but then my coworkers would say I changed back into jeans after that picture. And when it came to cleaning, she would say I didn't clean it well enough, etc. All of these would get turned into the owner, but she wouldn't fire me because they were so desperate for people no one wanted to work there. I wonder why. Eventually I quit because I had a job for the summer that gave me many more hours. In my summer job I made the same amount of money in 7 weeks that I made in a year at the last place. Right after I left, I learned why Pam wanted me gone so bad. Pam hired her son, my ex-friend, because he was too lazy to work a job where he couldn't sit around all day. That made me mad. But even worse, that they wouldn't give me my last payment. We were paid in cash. I sent multiple emails and text messages to Pam and the owner and reminded them that I needed it. When those went unanswered, I threatened legal action. Being a high schooler, I don't believe they thought I would do anything. How wrong they were. Well, there were many reasons I was mad. And so I decided I'd document every single thing about that place. These include 8+ hour workday with no breaks or a lunch, both of which are required in my state, rats in the basement, ant infestation, fake security cameras, allowing underage drinking, Pam faking the amount of money we had to pay her son and daughter for under-the-table work, child labor. Pam's daughter was not old enough to work, not fixing things like building framework, mold, etc., allowing temperatures to go above and below the legal limit. On bad days it was above 100 or below 50 inside. Drug use. Pam giving themselves a raise even though they already made more than everyone else there. Selling client information. Pam compiling clients for another worker to take with them to a new company. Usually not illegal, but the way they went about it was. I don't remember the exact details. Not doing anything but harassment. Not paying workers. There'd be days where we didn't have enough money in the drawer, and the owner and or Pam would be too lazy to go to the bank, so they would just straight up not pay us. Not only this, but prior to me leaving, I recorded some of the verbal abuse from Pam. Believe it or not, I even got them to admit making false write-ups on me. There was more, but I can't remember what else right now. Anyways, I compiled all of this and sent in an email to OSHA. Shit went down. In the end, both Pam and the owner were served with some hefty fines, and Pam is even facing jail time right now for fraud. The owner had to shut down their business and sell it. I don't know if the owner is facing any jail time. I also emailed every spa within 50 miles, so the owner, Pam, and some co-workers have been blacklisted from working within an hour of where we're located. I never did receive my last payment. It wasn't worth going to court over, but what came out of it was so much better. 9. This was back in high school in Denmark. I got a new teacher for social studies. Year 2. Among the first things she tells us about herself is that she hates swear words, really hates swear words. If she ever catches you swearing 3 times in one of her lessons, she would give you a 1,000-word essay for the next lesson. Now, I don't like swear words much either, but they are a natural part of speech. None of us ever got the threatened essay, although we didn't swear less, but it added so much stress to us, and the tally marks on the blackboard were humiliating. We all hated her from day one. After a couple of months, we had to analyze news articles and orally present them. There were a few categories, and we all had to do them in rotation. On the way home from Copenhagen to Odense on the train, reading the train magazine, I found an article. Cue my PettyRevenge. The article was about swearing and types of swear words, religious, sexual, medicinal, disguised swear words, the difference between swearing and strong language, how to use swearing productively and use it unproductively, etc. There was a month until I had the category that the article would fit into. I had to do 1 or 2 other articles before that one. I have never done my homework that early before or since. When the day finally came and I read out the title of my presentation, my teacher slammed her head down into the table with a light thud out of despair. It felt so good seeing that. It was like a movie scene. Out of common respect, I didn't swear at any point during my presentation, but I did describe the words thoroughly. I did my assignment, I didn't break her rules, so she couldn't do anything while I praised swearing. 10. Now, with this story, I would like to say that I had something to do with the sudden downfall in quality at my old store. But in all fairness, the manager kind of did this to herself. I used to work at a very popular coffee shop. We can call it Barstocks. This Barstocks is brand new to my town. It's only been around for a year now, and already it is becoming one of the worst places to go. It has a 3-star rating because of how awful the service is there. I started working there about 3 months after it had originally opened, and I quickly became one of the best baristas at the store. I was efficient with making the drinks, extremely friendly with the customers, and I was friends with literally everyone on the team, even my manager, who is the worst manager I've ever had the displeasure of working with, loved me, and thought I did an amazing job at the store. I struggle with depression and anxiety, and I had talked to my manager about keeping me away from the window. The window is basically where you take the orders in drive-thru and hand them their drinks when it's ready. You're not allowed to leave the window unless you're told, and usually you would spend the majority of your shift there. You're also supposed to talk to the customers until they get their drinks. You would get yelled at if you closed the window on a customer before their drinks were ready. Now, if I'm chilling for too long with nothing to do, my brain starts shutting down and throwing nasty thoughts in my face. This makes me extremely depressed and unresponsive even when I try to cheer myself up. She complied and left me on bar or support for most of my shifts. Now, at Barstocks there are usually 3 to 5 shift leads, many managers who run the shift when the manager isn't there. One shift lead, we will call Karen, decided that she didn't like that I got out of window duty. So if she saw I was working with her and she was shift lead for the day, she would put me in window. This led to a few instances where I became so depressed that by the end of my shift I was crying in the back room because of repressed memories being brought up or nasty and abusive thoughts coming to my head. This was made even worse because after every customer I encountered, Karen would berate me for not smiling and talking to customers. Karen and the manager, Mindy, are and have been best friends for years. So whenever Karen would see me struggling on window, she would go and tell Mindy that I was doing a terrible job and being rude to customers. Mindy decided to talk to me about it and blamed me for not being able to hold myself together, telling me that Barstocks helped her get through an abusive relationship, so I just needed to suck it up and get over it. Her exact words. After this, I made it my goal to never get put on window again. If I had a shift scheduled with Karen, I would ask someone to switch shifts with me, or ask to take up a shift in a different town so that I wouldn't have to deal with her. It worked for a while, and I only got put on window a few times after that, but with shift leaders who understood what I was going through, and who would allow me to help out my other co-workers whenever I could. One day I was on bar. It happened to be happy hour, but by this time we had already served over 500 customers. I had about 15 frappés to make, and with no help at all because Mindy didn't schedule enough people. This is important for later, and 2 of my favorite shift leads could see I was struggling. I don't blame them at all for what I did after this, and in fact I respect them so much more for how they handled the situation after I had left the floor. They just had the wrong timing for the situation. Both of them asked me to go to 2 different spots and try to give me a break from the bar. This made my already panicking brain go into immediate shutdown mode, and I quickly excused myself to the back room. I admit now that my actions weren't appropriate, but I was, at this point, having a major anxiety attack, so I couldn't control myself as much as I would have. I threw my headset on the floor, chipping it but not breaking it. I punched the door. It was metal, so nothing broke. Plus, it was loud in the store, so no customers could hear it. And I started sobbing hysterically on the floor. After the store calmed down a little, my absolute favorite shift lead, Kenzie, came into the room and comforted me. She saw my dad in the lobby and told me to talk to him for a bit. I apologized to the whole team later that day because I felt awful for how I had reacted. No one held it against me because most of them had anxiety or depression as well, so they understood. A day or 2 later, Mindy asked to speak to me, and she had the district manager with her. I was about to start my shift and had just walked into work when she told me that they, and I quote, "can't handle you anymore. You should try finding another store that can handle you," and that my termination would be permanent. I am not able to work for this company ever again. I spent the next, I kid you not, 3 weeks in the most depressed state I'd been in for a while. This was right before Thanksgiving, and I had just gotten the insurance I needed to start medically transitioning. I am transgender, female to male, and I almost had enough money to start taking testosterone. To make things worse, I genuinely enjoyed the job. It made me want to pursue coffee as a career, and the fact that I got fired permanently broke my heart. I was even more pissed off by how Mindy spoke to me when she was firing me. She sounded condescending, like she was the most powerful person in the room. Now for the revenge. A few months before I got fired was when things started to go downhill for our store. Mindy had decided that vacations to California, we live in Indiana, and Chicago and New York were far more important than running a store. So for about 2 weeks of every month, she would go on a business trip, only to show us vacation pictures of her kid and husband. She would fight with her husband in the lobby of our store with her child in front of customers. She would allow her child to stand on the counters we served food and drinks on, as well as run around the store like a wild animal. No shoes or shirt on, with only a diaper. She would constantly mess up our schedule. She would talk about other co-workers behind their backs. She would schedule co-workers to work in other towns even after they had said they can't and won't work in said towns. She even went as far as giving her manager tasks that only managers are allowed to do to the shift leads, because she didn't have time for them. These tasks include waste management, food management, money management, and a few others that I can't remember. She would then yell at the shift leads when everything wasn't done exactly like it needed to be, even though they weren't trained to do any of the extra tasks she put onto them. All of these things, combined with even more that she did that I won't bother you with, led to all of the staff disliking her and eventually hating her. After I got fired, that added more fuel to the already massive flame she made. Half of the store thought that she did this as a power move, and I can fire the most likable coworker I have, so that means I can fire all of you, sort of thing. When I finally managed to get myself back on my feet, my first course of action was to spread the word, starting with my family. I told everyone what happened. They've all stopped going entirely. I then moved on to other coffee shops in town, spreading the word that Mindy is a terrible manager who can't run a store, who fires teenagers for having anxiety attacks. Soon more and more people heard through my grapevine about what's been going on, and either don't go anymore or outwardly show their distaste for Mindy. Most of my old co-workers also quit because working there under Mindy's control wasn't worth the stress. This led to their numbers of staff to decrease exponentially. They've now become one of the most hated coffee shops in my town, due to the lack of staff and bad management. Most people who still go there wait upwards to 20 minutes for their drinks because there aren't enough people to keep up with their orders. They've even had to close the store a few times because they just didn't have enough people to work that day. Most days the line wraps all the way around the store and it almost bleeds into the street because no one is able to keep up with the amount of drinks being ordered. So even though I didn't necessarily end Mindy's career and shut her store down, I probably didn't even cause that big of a difference with sharing my sub-story to half of the town. I still like to believe that my loose lips spreading how horrible of a manager she is caused a chain of events to unfold. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to the Revenge is Ice Cream Archives, episode 24. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories. Busy week for me this week. In fact, it's going to be a busy couple of months because I'm having to make frequent trips down to the local hospital's dermatology department to get phototherapy. Not the first time I've done it, but, you know, it helps briefly, so we'll see how it works in conjunction with medication I'm trying. If not, then we're on to immunosuppressants. So that's what's going on with me. I hope that you're all doing well and that your lives are chugging along nicely, and if not, well, I hope the bad days are only temporary. Alright, with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.